There are certain truths you only learn in the absolute, crushing silence of the deep woods. Truths you can't read in a book or learn from a guide. You learn them when the birds stop singing in the middle of the day. You learn them when the hum of insects just cuts out like someone flipped a switch. The real predators, the ones that have existed in the shadows of our world for millennia, they don't announce their presence with a roar or a growl. They announce it with the sudden, profound absence of everything else. If you're ever out there and that blanket of silence falls, don't try to figure out why. Just run. That's your one and only warning. By the time you get a second one, it's already got you. My first lesson came when I was 21, during a solo camping trip in the Sierra Nevadas. I wasn't a novice. I'd spent most of my summers backpacking with my father. I knew how to read a map, how to pack for bad weather, how to hang a bear bag. I felt comfortable, competent. That was my first mistake. The woods don't care about your competence. I found a perfect little spot by a creek a few miles off the main trail. It was idyllic. The water babbled, the sun dappled through the tall pines, and I felt that deep sense of peace that only true isolation can bring. I set up my tent, made a small, responsible fire, and cooked my dinner. As dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the sky, I settled in. The temperature dropped, and the familiar night sounds began their symphony. Crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of some small critter in the underbrush. I was reading a book by headlamp when I first heard it. A voice. It was faint, carried on the wind, and it sounded like it was calling my name. "Jake!" I froze, straining to listen. It had to be another hiker, maybe someone who'd gotten lost. I stood up and called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The only reply was the chirping of the crickets. I dismissed it. The wind can play tricks, distort sounds. I sat back down, but the peace was gone. A knot of unease had tied itself in my gut. 10 minutes later, I heard it again, closer this time. "Jockey." The voice was wrong. It had the cadence of a human voice, the shape of my name, but the texture was off. It was thin, reedy, like a recording being played through a cheap speaker. A chilling thought surfaced. What if it wasn't a person? What if it was a bird, a parrot someone had lost out here? It was a stupid, desperate attempt at a rational explanation. I doused my fire completely, plunging my campsite into near-total darkness, save for the weak moonlight filtering through the canopy. I unzipped my tent just enough to slip inside and grabbed my largest hunting knife. I sat there cross-legged on my sleeping bag, knife in my lap, listening. For over an hour, there was nothing but the normal sounds of the forest. The knot in my stomach slowly began to loosen. I was just being paranoid. Then the silence fell. It wasn't gradual. It was instantaneous. The crickets, the rustling, the wind, everything just stopped. The only sound in the entire world was the frantic pounding of my own heart. And then I heard the footsteps. They were heavy, bipedal. A slow, deliberate crunching of leaves and twigs. It was circling my tent, slowly, methodically. It would take a few steps, then pause as if listening for me. I could hear its breathing now, a wet, ragged sound like fluid in its lungs. My own breath was trapped in my chest, a painful, burning pressure. The circling stopped. It was standing right outside my tent on the side where my head was. I could feel a presence there, a weight, a coldness that seemed to seep through the thin nylon. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I was a statue carved from pure terror. And then it spoke. Its voice wasn't a whisper from the trees anymore. It was right there, inches from my ear, as if its mouth was pressed against the fabric of the tent. But this time, it wasn't my name. It was my mother's voice, a perfect, flawless imitation of my mother, who had passed away 3 years prior. It used the exact tone, the exact gentle cadence she always used when I was sick as a child. It said, "Honey, are you okay in there?" "It's cold. Let me in." I didn't scream. I couldn't. The sound was trapped behind a wall of ice in my throat. My mind fractured. For a split second, a deeply broken part of me, the part that was still a grieving son, wanted to unzip the tent. It was a primal, insane urge. The thing outside seemed to sense my hesitation. The breathing grew heavier, more excited, and the voice changed. It was still my mother's, but it was distorted, laced with a desperate, hungry urgency. "Please, sweetie, I'm so cold. Just open the door. Let your mother in." I finally found my breath. It came out as a choked, pathetic whimper. That was all it needed. A deafening, guttural roar ripped through the silence, a sound of pure predatory rage, and a clawed hand, or something like it, tore through the side of my tent. The fabric shredded like paper. I scrambled backwards, away from the gaping hole, and saw nothing but a deeper darkness against the night. I didn't wait to see what it was. I kicked my way out the back of the tent, knife still clutched in my hand, and just ran. I ran blindly through the pitch-black forest, branches whipping my face, rocks tearing at my boots. I didn't care. I could hear it crashing through the woods behind me, that same wet, ragged breathing getting closer. I ran until my lungs felt like they were on fire, until my legs were jelly. I stumbled and fell down a small embankment, landing hard in the ice-cold water of the creek. The shock of the cold was what saved me, I think. It cleared my head for a fraction of a second. I scrambled to my feet and ran downstream in the water, knowing it would hide my scent and my tracks. I ran in that creek for what felt like an eternity, until the first hint of dawn began to gray the eastern sky. I never went back for my gear. I walked out to the main road, soaking wet, hypothermic, and half insane. When a park ranger eventually found me, I told him I'd been chased by a bear. He didn't believe me, but he couldn't explain the state I was in. I've never camped alone since. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I can still hear it. That perfect imitation of my mother's voice, whispering from the darkest corner of the room. Let me in. There are places on the map marked as wilderness, and then there are the places that the maps have forgotten. My girlfriend Clara and I found one of those places by accident. We were exploring a lesser-known national forest in West Virginia, looking for a particular waterfall we'd seen on an old blog. The directions were vague, mentioning a turnoff onto an unmarked service road. We found what we thought was the road, 2 dirt ruts disappearing into a thick canopy of trees. It felt like an adventure. For the first mile, it was just that. The woods were beautiful, ancient, and filled with the kind of deep, earthy smells that make you feel alive. But then the road began to change. It grew fainter, more overgrown. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches interlocking overhead, turning midday into a perpetual twilight. The air grew still and heavy. Clara, who is usually the more adventurous one, got quiet. I saw her rubbing her arms, even though it wasn't cold. "This feels weird," she said, her voice a near whisper. "Like we're not supposed to be here." I felt it too. A palpable sense of trespass. We should have turned back then, but my foolish pride wouldn't let me. We pushed on, and that's when we found them. At first, I thought they were just strange piles of sticks. But as we got closer, we realized they were constructs, totems. They were woven together from branches, animal bones, mostly deer, but some were disturbingly smaller, and strips of what looked like dried hide. They were arranged in a large circle in a small, unnaturally clear patch of forest floor. The ground inside the circle was bare, packed earth, despite the lush vegetation all around. In the center of the circle was a large, flat rock, stained dark brown. I didn't want to know what the stain was. The silence was what truly terrified me. It was the same profound, unnatural silence I've heard others describe. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of leaves. It was like the entire forest was holding its breath, watching us. "We need to go," Clara whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Now!" We turned and practically ran back the way we came. But the trail, it didn't look the same. The trees seemed to have shifted. Landmarks we thought we remembered were gone. Panic started to set in. We checked the compass on my phone. It was spinning wildly. The GPS couldn't get a signal. We were walking for what felt like an hour, pushing our way through the dense undergrowth, convinced we were heading back toward the main road. Instead, we broke through a line of thick ferns and found ourselves standing at the edge of the same clearing. The circle of totems stood there, silent and menacing. It was impossible. We had been walking in a straight line, directly away from it. Yet here we were again. A cold, heavy dread settled in my stomach. This wasn't just a forest. It was a trap. We tried again, this time marking trees with my knife as we went, making a conscious effort to bear left. The woods felt wrong. The light was fading faster than it should have been. Shadows stretched and twisted into unsettling shapes. We could feel eyes on us from all directions, a weight of unseen observation that made the hair on my arm stand up. After another hour of desperate hiking, we stumbled back into the clearing. Our knife marks were on the trees right at the edge. We had walked in a perfect circle. Clara started to cry, silent tears streaming down her face. I held her, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. My mind was racing. We were lost, trapped in some kind of geographical anomaly, and whatever had built those totems was out here with us. We decided to wait. We sat with our backs against a large oak at the edge of the clearing, facing the totems, refusing to let them out of our sight. As true darkness fell, the forest changed again. We began to hear noises, faint at first. A low chanting, almost too deep to be human. It seemed to come from all around us, a multi-layered guttural drone that vibrated in our bones. Then came a rhythmic clicking sound, like stones being struck together. It grew louder, closer. We saw movement in the trees. Tall, impossibly thin figures moving between the trunks with a disturbing, jerky gait. They weren't human. They were too tall, their limbs too long and spindly. They moved in and out of the shadows, never fully revealing themselves, their forms silhouetted against the dying light. They were gathering, forming their own circle around ours. We were surrounded. I pulled Clara closer, my knife feeling like a useless toy. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. We were just two people who had wandered into a place where they did not belong, a place that had been old when the mountains themselves were young. The chanting and clicking continued for hours. The figures never came into the clearing, but they never left either. They just watched us, their silent, shadowy audience to our terror. Just before dawn, as inexplicably as it had started, it stopped. The chanting faded, the clicking ceased, and the figures melted back into the woods. A few minutes later, the birds started singing again, as if nothing had happened. As soon as there was enough light to see, we ran. We didn't try to navigate. We just picked a direction and crashed through the undergrowth, fueled by pure adrenaline. And this time, we didn't end up back at the clearing. After 20 minutes of frantic running, we burst out onto the main paved road of the national forest, miles from where we had turned off. We never found the waterfall. We never spoke about what happened for a long time. There are no words to properly describe that night. But sometimes I see it in Clara's eyes. That memory of being small and helpless, trapped in a circle, while the ancient, hungry things of the woods watched us from the darkness. Buying the cabin was supposed to be our escape, a place away from the city, nestled deep in the forests of Montana. It was rustic, a bit run down, but it was ours. The first few months were bliss. We repaired the roof, stained the deck, and spent our evenings listening to the sounds of the woods. Then the sounds started changing. It began subtly. A scratching noise from under the floorboards in the main room. Mice, my husband Tom had said confidently. Or a raccoon. I'll set some traps. But the traps remained empty. The scratching continued, and it started to sound. Bigger. Heavier. Sometimes it wasn't scratching. It was a slow, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the dirt under the house. The cabin was built on stone pilings, creating a 3-foot crawl space underneath. We both hated the idea of going down there. It was dark, filled with spiders, and smelled of damp earth. One night we were watching a movie when we heard a loud thump from directly beneath our feet. It was so forceful it rattled the floorboards. Our dog, a usually fearless golden retriever named Gus, shot up from his bed, a low growl rumbling in his chest, his eyes fixed on the floor. What the hell was that? Tom asked, muting the TV. We sat in silence, listening. We heard it again, a solid, deliberate thump, and another. It sounded like someone was hitting the underside of our floor with a fist. Gus began to bark frantically, a sound I'd never heard from him before. It was laced with genuine fear. Tom grabbed the heavy fireplace poker and I grabbed the biggest flashlight we owned. I'm going to look, he said, his voice tight. I begged him not to. Let's just go into town for the night. We'll call animal control in the morning? But he was stubborn. He went to the small access hatch on the side of the cabin, a flimsy piece of plywood held in place by a simple latch. Gus stood behind him, whining, the hair on his back standing straight up. Tom unlatched the hatch and pulled it open, shining the powerful beam of the flashlight into the darkness. I don't see anything, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. He swept the light back and forth. Just dirt and rocks. He was about to close it when we heard a new sound. It came from the far back corner of the crawl space, deep in the shadows beyond the flashlight's reach. It was a low, guttural breathing, a deep, wet, rattling sound. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a raccoon. It wasn't any animal I had ever heard. Tom slammed the hatch shut and latched it, his face pale in the porch light. Get back inside, he hissed. We retreated into the cabin, locking the door behind us. Gus was pacing nervously by the fireplace, still growling. We didn't sleep that night. The thumping continued intermittently, sometimes accompanied by that horrifying breathing. Around 3 a.m., a new sound started. A scraping, splintering noise. It was coming from the floorboards in the center of the room. I shined the flashlight on the floor and saw it. The wood was visibly vibrating. Sawdust was puffing up from between the planks. Something was trying to claw its way up from below. It wanted in. We piled the heaviest furniture we had, the solid oak dining table, the armchair, the chest of drawers, onto that spot on the floor. We barricaded the doors and windows and spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of the bedroom, Tom holding the poker and me holding a kitchen knife, with Gus trembling between us. The sounds finally stopped with the first light of dawn. We waited for an hour after the sun was fully up before we dared to move. Tom, armed with a shotgun this time, went outside and checked the crawlspace hatch. It was still latched. Whatever was down there was still down there, or had another way out. We didn't stay to find out. We packed a single bag, got Gus in the car, and left. We drove straight to a realtor's office in the nearest town and put the cabin up for sale. We sold it at a massive loss, telling the new owners there was a persistent pest problem under the house. I still have nightmares about it. I dream of being in that cabin and I can hear the scratching beneath my feet. And sometimes, in the dream, the floorboards finally give way, and a long, pale, multi-jointed arm reaches up from the darkness below. We never went back to the woods. We live in a condo in the city now on the 15th floor. But sometimes, when the wind howls just right, I can almost hear a faint scratching sound coming from the floor beneath my bed. Fear has a texture. It's cold and grainy, like static electricity on your skin. I learned that on a camping trip with 3 of my closest friends in the Uinta Mountains. We were celebrating our college graduation. 4 of us ready to take on the world, feeling invincible. The campsite was perfect, a clearing on the edge of a meadow with a backdrop of towering pines. We spent the day hiking, fishing, and telling stupid jokes. As night fell, we built a huge bonfire, the flames leaping and dancing, casting our shadows long and distorted against the wall of trees. We drank, we laughed, and we felt like kings of the wilderness. It was around midnight when Mike went to bed first, followed by Sarah. Liam and I stayed up, nursing the last of the whiskey and talking by the fire. The woods were alive with sound, the usual symphony of the night. It was peaceful. Sometime around 2 a.m., Liam finally stumbled off to his tent, leaving me alone with the dying embers. I wasn't tired. I leaned back against a log, looking up at the impossible spray of stars in the moonless sky. It was beautiful. That's when I first felt it. The static. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The feeling of being watched. I sat up straight, scanning the impenetrable wall of darkness that was the tree line. The fire was too low to offer much light beyond a few feet. I saw nothing, but the feeling intensified. It wasn't just one pair of eyes. It felt like a crowd, an audience. I threw another log on the fire, a sudden desperate need for light flooding through me. As the flames flared up, they cast a flickering, uncertain light on the edge of the forest. And for a second, I thought I saw them. Shapes, tall, unnaturally thin silhouettes standing just inside the trees. I blinked and they were gone. Just tricks of the light, I told myself. Shadows playing games with my tired, whiskey-soaked brain. I decided to turn in. I crawled into the tent I was sharing with Liam. He was fast asleep, snoring softly. I zipped up the tent flap, feeling a ridiculous sense of security from the thin layer of nylon. I lay there in my sleeping bag, my heart still beating a little too fast, and listened. The normal night sounds had stopped. The silence was back. That heavy, expectant silence. I knew with a certainty that defied all logic that they were still out there. I had to look. I couldn't stop myself. I slowly, silently unzipped the small mesh window on the side of the tent, just a crack, and peered out. The fire had burned down to a dull red glow, but it was enough. They were there. Not just a few. Dozens of them. They were standing in a line just where the meadow met the trees, a silent phalanx of towering skeletal figures. They were completely black, devoid of any features, like holes cut out of the night sky, and they were perfectly unnervingly still. They were just watching our camp, watching our tents, watching me. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. My first instinct was to scream to wake everyone up, but my voice was gone. A primal part of my brain took over, screaming at me that to make a sound to acknowledge them would be a fatal mistake. So I just lay there, my eye pressed to the tiny opening in the mesh, my body rigid with fear. I watched them for what felt like a lifetime. They never moved. They never made a sound. They were a silent, terrifying audience to the night. At one point, one of them, right in the center, tilted its head slightly as if it knew I was watching. The gesture was so subtle, so deliberate, it sent a fresh jolt of ice through my veins. I don't know when I passed out. It wasn't sleep. My mind just shut down from the sheer overload of fear. I woke up to the sound of Sarah making coffee. Sunlight was streaming into the tent. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs, and scrambled to the window. The meadow was empty. The tree line was just a line of trees. The sun was shining. It was just a normal morning. "Dude, you look like you've seen a ghost," Liam said, stretching as he woke up. I couldn't tell them. How could I? It sounded like a nightmare, a hallucination. They would think I was crazy. I tried to act normal all day, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept glancing at the tree line, expecting to see them standing there watching. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. I sat up with a hunting knife in my hand, staring out the mesh window, but they didn't return. We left the next day, and I've never been back. But the memory of that silent audience is burned into my mind. I know what I saw. They weren't a dream. They were real. And I have the chilling, unshakable feeling that they are still out there, in the deep, dark places of the world, just standing and watching and waiting. We all know there are roads you shouldn't take at night. Not because they're dangerous, but because sometimes they don't go where they're supposed to. I was driving home from a business meeting in a rural part of Ohio, a 5-hour trip I'd done a dozen times. It was late, close to midnight, and a thick, soupy fog had rolled in, reducing visibility to almost nothing. My GPS was on the fritz, constantly recalculating, so I was relying on road signs and memory. I saw a sign for a detour due to road construction ahead. It pointed me down a 2-lane county road I didn't recognize. I figured it would loop me back to the main highway in a few miles. The road was paved at first, but after about 10 minutes it turned to gravel. The fog was so thick here it was like driving through milk. My headlights barely penetrated the gloom. There were no other cars, no houses, no lights of any kind. Just the road, the fog, and the dark looming shapes of trees on either side. I drove for what felt like a very long time. I should have been back on the highway by now. I checked my phone again. No signal. Service not available. The car's clock read 1:30 a.m. I had been on this road for over an hour. A cold unease began to creep up my spine. This wasn't right. I decided to turn around, but the road was narrow, with steep ditches on both sides. I'd have to find a pull-off or a driveway, but there was nothing. Just the endless straight gravel road. Then my car started to sputter. The engine coughed, the headlights flickered, and then everything died. I was coasting. I pumped the brakes, bringing the car to a slow stop in the middle of the road. I tried the ignition. Nothing. The battery was completely dead. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere in a thick fog with no way to call for help. I sat there for a moment, the silence deafening after the hum of the engine. I decided my only option was to wait for another car to come along. But as the minutes ticked by, turning into half an hour, I realized no one was coming. This road was completely deserted. Then I saw it, a light, faint and far away, but it was there. A single dim yellow light, glowing weakly through the fog. Hope surged through me. A house, a farm. Someone who could help. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight, locked the car, and started walking towards the light. The gravel crunched loudly under my feet. The fog was so dense I could barely see the ground in front of me. I kept my eyes fixed on that distant yellow glow, my only beacon in the oppressive darkness. It took me a long time to reach it, much longer than I expected. The light never seemed to get any closer, but finally I began to make out a shape, a building. It was an old, dilapidated gas station, the kind you see in horror movies. The paint was peeling, the windows were grimy, and one of the gas pumps was knocked over on its side. But the light was on. A single bare bulb hanging in the office window casting that sickly yellow glow. The sign above the door read, "Closed," but the light was on, so someone had to be there. I walked up to the glass door and peered inside. The office was coated in a thick layer of dust. Old faded calendars from the 1970s hung crookedly on the walls. Behind the counter, a figure was sitting in a chair, its back to me. It was wearing an old-fashioned mechanic's jumpsuit. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and weak. I knocked on the glass. "Excuse me? My car broke down. Can you help me?" The figure didn't move. It didn't even flinch. It just sat there, perfectly still. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the cold night air. Something was profoundly wrong. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. I scanned the area around the gas station. There were no other buildings, no houses, no other lights. Just this one lonely, impossible place. And then I heard a sound, a faint, tinny music. It was coming from inside the gas station. An old-timey, cheerful tune, like something from a 1940s radio show. But it was warped and slow, as if the radio's batteries were dying. The music seemed to break the spell. My survival instinct kicked in, screaming at me to get away. I turned and ran back into the fog, away from the gas station, away from the unmoving figure and the distorted music. I didn't stop running until the yellow light was completely swallowed by the fog. I ran until I was exhausted. Then I walked, stumbling blindly down the gravel road. I don't know how long I walked. Hours, maybe. Just as the sky was beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn, the fog started to thin. And then I saw them. Headlights. A car was coming towards me. It was a police cruiser. The officer stopped, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Son, what on earth are you doing out here?" he asked. I tried to explain. "My car, the detour, the gas station." He just shook his head. "There's no detour on this highway, and there hasn't been a gas station on this road for 50 years. They tore it down after the old owner." "Well, after what happened?" He wouldn't say what happened. He drove me back towards the highway. We never found the gravel road I had turned down. It just wasn't there. It was like it had never existed. And my car? We found it parked on the shoulder of the main highway, right where it would have been if I'd never taken the detour. The battery was fine. It started right up. There was no sign of construction, no detour signs. I don't know what happened that night. Was it a dream? A hallucination? Or did I wander onto a road that isn't on any map, a place that only appears in the fog and the darkness? I don't have any answers. But I know that when I drove away that morning, I looked in my rearview mirror, and for just a second, I thought I saw a dim yellow light, glowing faintly in the distance, before it vanished completely. If you've ever stood at the edge of the woods and felt a cold dread creep up your spine, that primal feeling that you aren't as alone as you think you are, hit that subscribe button and share your story in the comments below. Because some things need to be told so others know they aren't crazy. Stay safe out there, and whatever you do, if you hear something familiar calling your name from the trees, don't answer.